Hi guys, welcome back to our channel. Quick little disclaimer, the seasons and episode numbers get really mixed up. So if they're really confusing, my apologies. They got really messed up in filming, so we're just gonna go. This was just gonna be season 3 with all the episodes to now each section is a season. So yeah, so my apologies. Anyways, so we are in season 2, episode 2. Okay, if we're going by section. Okay, so a turning point. The year 1781 marked a major turning point for the war for the Continental Army's leadership and for the fate of America's French allies. First, in December 1780, Washington replaced General Horatio Gates with General Nathaniel Greene as the commander of the Continental Army in the southern colonies. In January 1781, at the Battle of Cowpens, American forces under Brigadier General Daniel Morgan dealt a major blow to British forces led by Colonel Bonestray Tarleton. In early 1781, British General Cornwallis, determined to complete the Southern strategy, followed Greene on a series of countermarches around North Carolina. On March 15th, Greene confronted the exhausted and supply-strapped British at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. Despite his success in the Carolinas, Cornwallis argued that he could not subdue the South till he controlled Virginia, and thus for 3 months his forces marched through Virginia, raiding the farms and plantations. The Battle of Yorktown. The inability of the British forces to mobilize loyalists in the southern colonies frustrated officials in London, where complaints of the war's cost and duration grew louder. From outside of New York City, Washington and Rochambeau, I'm sorry if I just butchered his name, led a joint Franco-American army 300 miles south. On September 28, 1781, a combined force of 7,800 French soldiers, 3,100 militia, and 8,000 Continental Army troops under the command of General George Washington surrounded Cornwallis. On the morning of October 17, 1781, the French and American forces spotted a British officer waving a white handkerchief. Britain was prepared to surrender. On October 19, 1781, some 8,000 British soldiers marched out of Yorktown and laid down their arms. Continued hostilities. Yorktown was the last major military engagement of the Revolutionary War. When news of the British defeat reached London, public support for the war, which was already waning, evaporated. The war's unpopularity, coupled with the instability in Parliament, led Britain to acquiesce to American demands for independence. In January 1782, Parliament passed a law forbidding any additional offensive action by the British Army in North America. While no major battles occurred after Yorktown, skirmishes and raids continued on both sides. An example of the small-scale fighting was the Battle of the Combahee River on August 27, 1782. A small force of American soldiers led by John Lawrence, best known for his opposition to slavery, his efforts to recruit enslaved soldiers, engaged a British foraging party in South Carolina near Charleston. Lawrence was fatally wounded in the conflict, however. So, the Western Frontier. In the last years of the war, the Western Frontier, including present-day Ohio, Michigan, Virginia, Kentucky, and Pennsylvania, became a significant site of conflict between British and American forces. Native Americans found themselves caught between the two foes. At first, the Continental Congress and the British both endeavored to keep Native Americans out of the war, but this proved impossible. The Hutton Massacre. The British and Americans launched raids against each other, usually targeting settlements. Despite the end of the formal engagements, 1782 was the bloodiest year of the war in the West. On March 8, 1782, Pennsylvania militiamen massacred 96 natives, mainly women and children, at the Christian Moravian mission at Hutton, Ohio. Shortly after the Hutton Massacre, Colonel William Crawford led 480 Pennsylvania militiamen into Native American territory. Learning of the Crawford expedition in advance, a joint force of British and Native Americans met them at the Sandusky River and surrounded them. The Americans retreated, suffering an estimated 70 casualties. Crawford and an unknown number of prisoners were tortured and executed in retaliation for the massacre at Nottingham. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but in August, a joint Native and Loyalist force soundly defeated American troops at the Battle of Blue Licks in Kentucky. The following month, American defenders at Fort Henry managed to outlast a siege by the British, Loyalist, and Native forces in one of the final battles of the Revolutionary War. With peace negotiations proceeding apace in the fall of 1782, the Continental Army paused expeditions into the western frontier. Women at war in the home front. Women played a pivotal role in maintaining farms and businesses during the long years of war, while struggling with inflation, shortages, and local unrest. British blockades, the destruction of crops, and the need to feed soldiers made certain items scarce. Experience with abstaining from certain products due to the boycotts of the 1760s and 1770s, American women prepared tea substitutes and wove their own homespun cloth. Women on the home front. Women on both sides faced challenges. Lucy Flucker Knox, wife of Continental Army Colonel Henry Knox, recounted these hardships in a 1777 letter, reporting that the price of everything is so absorbent, indeed it is difficult to get the necessaries of life here, at any price. The evil increases daily. Beef is at 8 pence a pound if you will take half an ox neck, shins, and all you may get it for 7 pence. For butter we give 2 shillings a pound. And this behavior of our own town meeting has almost made me a Tory. Abigail Adams, wife of John Adams, transmitted information and political opinions in her letters, constantly commenting on the economic stresses and strains of the Revolutionary War as it unfolded. Meanwhile, Loyalist Catherine Van Cortlandt reported how these difficulties could be compounded for those who held different views than their neighbors. Loyalist women, mostly unable to vote or hold political office, were frequently defined by their male relatives' politics. Loyalist wives could claim neutrality early in the war, but the British battle for public support often riled local communities. Van Cortlandt joined the British Army, but Catherine and her 9 children struggled for several months as her Patriot neighbors refused to help her. Finally, George Washington took pity upon the family's plight and gave her a pass to rejoin her husband in New York. Since women were not considered a threat, both Patriot and Loyalist women crossed enemy lines with food, clothing, letters, etc. Women at war. Women were vital components of Revolutionary-era armies. Single women, often known as camp followers, followed along with the troops as they traveled. Generals frequently complained about having camp followers. However, these women proved essential and provided essential services to the army, such as nursing, laundry, cooking, and companionship. Women's duties were mainly restricted to the camp, but few women also participated in battle. Mary Ludwig Hayes followed her husband, an enlisted gunner, to the Pennsylvania Artillery in the 1778 campaign. At the Battle of Monmouth on June 28, 1778, Hayes traveled back and forth from a nearby spring to bring soldiers water, tasks that many women carried out during the heat of the battle, earning them the nickname Molly Pitcher. Contributions by Black Americans. At the start of the American Revolution, an estimated 500,000 enslaved persons lived within 13 colonies. So, Black Loyalists. One liberating force for enslaved Black Americans in the American Revolution was the British Army, which, in order to weaken the rebellious colonies, helped to free 3,000 to 10,000 people. The British intention was not to end slavery, but rather deprive rebellious enslavers of their labor. Enslaved peoples with Loyalist enslavers were returned. Black Patriots. Many Black Americans, such as Crispus Attucks, who was killed in the Boston Massacre, actively supported the American Revolution. A small number of enslaved persons also won their freedom by fighting in the Continental Army, despite the prejudice of Patriot leaders. Some 5,000 enlisted in the state militias and the Continental Army. In 1778, Rhode Island, which had a higher proportion of enslaved people than the other New England colonies, formed a Black regiment and promised freedom to those who enlisted, while compensating their enslavers for the loss of property. Jack Sisson was an enslaved African American. He served in the 1st Rhode Island Regiment. In July 1777, Sisson and 40 other troops under the command of Colonel William Barton covertly sailed through British-controlled waters to capture British General Richard Prescott as a prisoner of war.
Native Americans, several of them allied themselves with the colonists. However, the majority were sided with the British, which was approximately 13,000. The Six Nations who were with the British were the Iroquois Confederacy, and America was concerned through this, and eventually the natives remained in a sort of neutral state, but more with the British. At the end of the Confederacy was that the natives split, and many of them remained bitter towards each other, so many tribe against tribe, and this eventually broke up the Six Nations. The Creek, the Seminoles, and the Cherokee also played a vital role in the battles of Fort Charlotte, Mobile, and the siege of Pensacola. Finally, while the Treaty of Paris did bring some peace, it destroyed native relations, and now they tried to negotiate with the newly founded United States of America.